right, we are back with the ThreatCon 1 podcast. Patrick, how you doing, man?
Great. It's nice and cold here in Michigan.
Yeah, as you can see, it's cold in Massachusetts as well, and like my back is killing me from shoveling. But you know, enough about us getting old and injured. We're back with the ThreatCon 1 podcast, the place to be to talk about emerging threats with the people who matter. Today, let's welcome Neil Robinson from Virgin Money. Neil, thank you for joining us from the UK today.
What's up, Neil?
Amazing to be here with you. So thanks for the invite.
Of course. No, we're super pumped. It was great to meet you in London last month. You know, just great to get to know you a little bit. Your insights are awesome. Give our listeners a little bit of an idea, Neil, of kind of what you do in your role in Virgin Money, and then we'll dig into some cool stuff after that.
Yeah, sure. So I started out life as an engineer building systems to make sure that they were secure. And then spent a bit of time in risk and frameworks and finally found my current kind of life, which is building and securing enterprise level security. I spent the last 3 years at Virgin Money. We've been part of a transformation that took us from tier 2 to tier 1. I've done lots of work around vulnerabilities and making sure that, you know, we're trying to identify and get those out of our environment. And very, very proud about building a super, super amazing team who are doing an amazing job defending against all of the criminals and bad actors.
I love it. And, you know, not only are we excited to have you here, but your extensive history in financial services goes pretty far back. And I'm not trying to call you old, but you've spent quite a bit of time at Standard Chartered, RBS, now with Virgin Money. Give us an idea of how you got started and like the things that sort of like percolate in your brain around basically the financial services industry.
Yeah, so you know, I'm definitely, as you can tell by the grey beard, I'm definitely getting there in terms of getting closer to retirement than the start of my career. But yeah, so 25 years, 15 years in Asia, so 5 in Hong Kong, 10 in Singapore, generally with big banks. So as you mentioned, Standard Chartered, 50 countries, 3 major business lines. It's got a wholesale bank and a retail bank. And then more recently with Virgin, which is a domestic bank in the UK, second biggest combined group with Nationwide for mortgages. And that's really been super interesting to go from a big organization to a smaller organization and really understand, you know, the nature of security. Just it changes. It's never really gone. You know, maybe the threat's slightly different because you're a big international business versus a small domestic business. But nonetheless, a lot of the toolkits that we use are very, very similar.
What's your perspective on the high volume, big stakes scenario with financial services organizations? Basically, the emerging threats are significant. Obviously, there's probably some regional focus as to where the threats are actually coming from. Being in the UK, you're a little closer to some of the action coming from the East. But what keeps you up at night in terms of emerging threats that not necessarily that you face, but that you know are on the horizon?
Yes, I think increasingly it's become politicized. So, I mean, you'd have to be living in a hole not to have been sort of paying attention to the sort of significant changes in the geopolitical environment. And it feels like the new norm is that cyber is part of that. So like that's definitely something that we worry about. We have a mature threat team where we really look at, you know, things that are targeting the UK, things that are targeting, you know, allies, things that are targeting specifically banking. And we're starting to see some changes in the way that, you know, some of our adversaries are thinking about us as a potential target. You know, you've seen a whole bunch of regulation around critical national infrastructure, of which banks are one of those. I think, you know, ransomware is never far from the mind. It is both something that keeps any CISO awake at night, but it is also something that it's observable and it's useful to enable us to get the funding that we need to do the work that we need. Because I think that's the other bit is sometimes when it's happening in the shadows, people fool themselves, including boards and execs and CISOs, that maybe because it's not happened to them, that it's never going to happen. And I think that's the thing increasingly is when you talk to other CISOs in banks, it's not about if you're going to be hacked. It's not about if you are going to get ransomware. It's about when, how do you respond? And so I think there's some shift to some of those later control stages to really exercising and really thinking about immutable backups and really thinking about spending more of our capital in that space, not just in investing in the protect and the identify parts of that NIST chain. So I've seen a real shift in recent times, and also just pushing that up into the board and exec level, where ultimately they need to buy into that. You need to go in and look at all of your recovery processes for something that they've not observed happen. Maybe they've not experienced it in their lifetime, but now they are starting to sort of hear that and see that in terms of, in the UK, you've had Jaguar Land Rover, you've had Marks and Spencers. So these things really have caught their boardroom attention. And I think that's, it's very negative in one sense, the impact in the economy. I think the JLR one was something like 2% on our net GDP, so huge impact. But it also means that it is real, and it means that people then take it seriously.
Yeah, I think more recently, especially as ransomware, came about, I don't know, 2012, 2013, really more seriously, it is kind of an unfortunate reality, right? That now it's hitting the people's and organizations' pocketbooks. So ultimately, like, that drives funding for a lot of initiatives to take on for organizations. So not necessarily a great thing, but I think that is a reality for a lot of security organizations and CISOs.
And it seems like it's more about, like, I think what I'm hearing from you, Neil, is it's more about resilience and building that muscle memory around resilience, because things are going to happen. That threats are going to continue to evolve, and it's really never going to stop either. So, like, how do you put that all together and stitch everything together so it's like you're focused on some prevent, you're focused on some recovery, but like in the middle, it's like, what are the things that you do to really like build that muscle memory one way or another? I think that'd be an interesting thread.
Yeah, I think that bit around this sort of real shift in mindset from protect, detect to resilience, and that it's quite an abstract thing, but actually when you start to think about that and you have a collective push into it. So if you look at the leadership teams and you're talking to people who are running the infrastructure, they really do worry about resilience from a service perspective, but increasingly they're starting to worry about it from a security perspective. And the same for the app, same for the actual business owners. So it is this sort of common language that we can all talk together. So we have roughly 11 what we call important business services, and you roughly get the same across most of the banks. It's sort of 11 to 15 depending on if they are also running an investment or a commercial bank. And It's just a common way of bringing together like the actual business strategy with the infrastructure and making sure that you are able to align your investments with those things. So I think it's been a super useful evolution. Not there yet, but yeah, it's definitely been super positive in terms of the regulators helping to push that through and make sure that people are really thinking about it in the right way, prioritizing it in the right way. So yeah, really interesting point.
Hey, I got a question about, over the period of time you've been at this, which is a long period, are there any significant changes in like, the velocity in which, you're seeing things happen, how responsive and proactive or reactive your teams need to be? Like, just curious from, someone that's on the ground floor.
Yeah, look, I think at the super macro level, so 25 years, just everything it's very hard to have any real frame of reference, but everything is much faster. So in the beginning, when I started in banking, it was still very common that people would go to an ATM and get cash out. And that just seems really wild. Like I barely know anybody that goes to get cash out in the UK anymore or pays in cash. And I use that as an example because it's a really good way of understanding how profoundly different banking is now from when it was in the beginning. And then you bring that into the cyber domain, and that's super important because cyber is, it's digital. So the more value that we're processing across these digital platforms, the more people use it, then the bigger the attack surface. And then the more digital it is, the more automated it is, the more pressure we come under to optimize our cost, to optimize how much we spend to automate things. And so, yeah, just the overall, I guess, half-life of any one of these initiatives is just getting faster and faster. And the latest evolution is agentic. So if you look at some of the tools now that are starting to come through, they're not there yet. We're still like, it feels like we're on that kind of steep learning curve, but they really have the promise of taking some of the things that we've never been able to automate. So for example, I was looking at a platform this morning that will help us automate real threat feeds into detection in near real time. So all we need to do is say, look, these are our top 5 threats, these are the actors, and near real time, it will convert that into detections for a lot of our assets. So that used to be months and a team of 20 plus people. And I'm seeing that in multiple different domains. So you then look at, I mean, I was reading your report, Patrick, in terms of the number of exploits, number of KEVs that were you found before they were actually published. And I definitely see that theme. And it definitely resonates with what we're seeing.
When we met last month in London at the CISO dinner, you gave the assembled group of guests sort of a glimpse into the cybersecurity leadership function, right? And how that's evolved for not only just you, but for like that evolves entire like cybersecurity teams. But you made two things pretty clear. One, in terms of like objectives that you're focused on. One, reducing overall risk. It's essential, and figuring out like the right way to measure what you're doing and the right way to report that into the board. And the second thing was minimizing that attack surface across all assets, across the entire business, and how that's becoming almost the North Star for security leaders. Give us a, like, in terms of managing exposures, give us an idea of like your perspective on maybe digging a little bit more into exactly kind of like what that means for security leadership.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of things in there related. So the risk point is, as we were talking a little bit earlier around sort of the digitization of banking, I think the sort of paradox is then that the people that are super valuable to banks are those that really understand the technology. So both very technical CISOs, but also CIOs. The paradox is that actually it's really risk that we're managing. It's not the technology. And so you tend to have a bias towards having people that are really good at, Windows or RHEL or, whatever the technology is. But actually, once you start to talk to the businesses and the boards, really what they're trying to get at is, okay, well, what's your ransomware risk? Or what's the risk that somebody is going to take your system out and you're not going to be able to, I don't know, provide people with payment transactions for 24 hours? And I think that translation layer is really difficult, because often when risks are written down, somebody might talk about the risk of your ransomware. Somebody else might talk about the loss of service to your customers, both different points of that risk. And so there's no common taxonomy for how you do it. So I think that's one common problem, but it's absolutely in the next generation of CISOs, the best people are the ones who are able to bridge that gap. And I've often heard the CISO role described as sort of chief translation officer. And I think that's really accurate in the things you've got to do. You've got to be able to quickly dip into the detail and quickly then dip out and explain it in terms that maybe I could explain to my kids, like to my 16-year-old. And then the attack stuff is slightly different. I think that the bit there that is often misunderstood is we get really obsessed with addressing the risk by applying more controls. So it might be, you want to roll out Akamai, you want to roll out some kind of DDoS platform. We think a lot about how do you take action to mitigate the risk. But the attack surface is really about, like, how do you actually just reduce the actual thing you need to defend? So do you need 6,000 servers? Do you need 6,000 servers that have got automated exposure management on them? So there are ways of managing the risk that enable it to be a smaller surface that you're protecting. And I think very often we forget that first step, which is like, can we just have a nice, simple, tidy stack that we all understand and is really easy to protect, versus you guys, there's the toy store, go and buy anything you like. It doesn't matter what color it is, just buy anything you like. And often you end up in that situation because people aren't thinking about the security and the risks of going into the toy store without a sort of a strict mandate on how much you've got to spend and what color you can buy.
Yeah, it's the scenario where it's like you could conceivably incur a lot of technical debt as well too, in that, where you're not finding the right use cases for particular technologies, or you're not getting the right data out of it. And is it the limitation of the tool, or is it the people that are using the tool? And is there some way to automate it? Like, it almost seems like now today there's more decisions you have to make on how you go and build that model that suits your business, because you're always bringing in new technologies for the business itself. And to your point, it's like it almost like the nirvana state is like this nice little stack that we go and protect, and it's just kind of like an easy job. But the reality is you actually have more decisions to make, given the rise of new technologies that can actually help you or maybe even hinder you at some point, as like across minimizing exposures.
Yeah, I mean, the classic is where you use some kind of third-party platform where, maybe they've got much greater investment capacity, much better functionality. And, it might be a SaaS platform, might just be just a platform that you want to put your own servers on. And I think unless you think of it from end to end, you sort of make the right decision for that little slice. And then you sort of forget the end to end and you forget that actually you've got to secure it as well. And I think that's, it's a really difficult thing to do. It's very easy to conceptualize, super difficult to do, I think, in the modern world.
It sure is. Well, with shifting into like specifically threats, what's more dangerous today for defenders to take into account? Is it ransomware or is it truly the emergence of AI threats? AI continues to be just, it always comes up as a topic on Patrick's and my discussions because it's such an important consideration today. But are we just scratching the surface with the level of threat that AI is bringing on, particularly in the financial services industry? Or is there still some like focus, that's not sort of forward looking? Or is it almost like kind of, hey, like we know these threats exist, we know DDoS exists, we know that exploited vulnerabilities exist. Like, is there that next level that you're looking at and that your team is always looking at?
Yeah, so I think it's still super early days. I think the adoption of some of the, AI has been around for years, but this sort of next generation of AI, so large language models, like it's clearly really different, but it feels like it's evolving really quickly. So it's a super difficult question, a bit like trying to, nail Jello to the wall. I think
Bilia.
yeah, but it's like, I guess what I worry about is that speed element. So is it going to give people who've got maybe mediocre skills scale and speed that are really going to cause us problems? And it's a bit like using a sports metaphor. It's like when footballers like line up against each other. And at the moment, you sort of know there's only going to be so many people on the field. But if all of a sudden that starts to change really quickly, or they're able to change their positioning really quickly, you're not able to adjust your defense. So enterprises move relatively quickly, and we've relied on these models where it's perimeter. We understand network security. Increasingly, we understand app security. But that's one of the things that I think is really difficult to move quickly for us. I think the flip side is actually I think there's a huge potential for some of this new AI tech in terms of defending, and what do you really need to defend? Well, you need resources. So, a lot of the big banks have got resources, but you also need data, and we understand and have got the data for our environments. So that I think gives us an inherent advantage on paper. I mean, we will see how it evolves. I think it's too early to say. It's definitely something that people worry about. And then I think that the final bit is just, at the moment, we are not really at a point where some of these new systems are being deployed at scale for big enterprises. There are certain verticals where we're starting to see people deploying it and trying to sell it to us, actually. But I think that will be a whole new world in terms of really understanding those attack surfaces, really understanding how people can attack us through LLMs, really thinking about some of the authentication mechanisms. But I think it's super early days, really, we're not exposed to it because we haven't deployed them yet. So, yeah.
I agree with you. I think that, there's a lot of sensation about AI, but I think like we're very early in the life cycle. You look at any technology, and I think, this one appears to be moving faster, but at the same time, you have to see how it's going to be leveraged and used. The biggest thing that I see is a lot more noise. So I do think one of the big risks that you kind of pointed out is now you have people that don't have subject matter expertise or context trying to do things. And naturally that then creates low quality output.
What's it called? AI slop.
Yeah. Literally, it's like there's so much of it. And I see it in my job every day where it's like, now we're just getting tons of information that's inaccurate, wrong, misleading, because ultimately someone doesn't have the expertise and didn't analyze this. They just threw it at an LLM and push it out as facts. And that can be a multitude of things. I think even on the defense side, it's like, okay, now people are going around, throwing exploits that look like something real, but don't work. I think a lot more false positives. On the other side, you might apply AI to validate that stuff. But I think like more and more, the AI slop aspect is going to get really interesting and how that just clogs up potential resources.
Yeah, I really like that point. It might be that actually as defenders, we just get lazy. And so actually our overall hygiene gets worse because we've got this amazing tooling, but it's just maybe just 5% worse, but that's enough. That's enough to dramatically change our risk posture. Yeah, that's a nice point.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It is. Well, and I think one of the really interesting things too are about just like living in the financial services industry, particularly in the UK, Neil, is like you have access to intelligence reports, you have access to like specific threat reports and data that you can presumably that you can use to layer into your defenses, your model, the reduction of attack surface across the board. Give us an idea of how you would use those intelligence reports that come out that are like industry specific.
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of bits to that. So we have active intelligence sharing communities that we use that are specific to banking. You've got the NCSC, which is the National Cyber Centre in the UK that orchestrates a lot of that. We're a member of one called the Cyber Defence Alliance. And so again, we share intel through that that's specific to our sector. Super helpful in informing our posture, but also things like vulnerabilities. So quite often when we get vulnerabilities come through, we'll use those to just syndicate to some of our other members. I think the other bit is, the regulators. So the Bank of England, specifically for banks, has some regulations that require us to go through this. Effectively, it's called CBEST. So it's a testing regime that we go through. Now it's super humbling and super useful. So they come in and they'll pen test you, always give you this really depressing report that you just hope that your bosses kind of really understands the context of. But then ultimately what they do is they aggregate that up and they give the whole industry the thematics. So you can get a sense of, okay, maybe this is something that we collectively need to work together on. Oh, maybe that wasn't on my report, but I need to, maybe go and have a look at that. So I think that's really, really super useful. And it's really heavily indexed on your ability to detect and how you respond, not just how they get in. So it really is, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it really helps us test some of those kind of later stages of an attack and how we react, which is super, super useful, I think.
Well, you also have access to different people. Like sometimes I think we're getting to the point where we're so reliant on data, right? Like it's our belief that there's like in this industry overall, we have a data problem. We don't really have a tools problem. There's plenty of tools to pick from.
Yeah.
But what's your perspective on like finding the right data that's most helpful, that's timely, and that's like you're just like you can't live without it. You can't function without it. And like how do you take data and spread that across the board or like layer it into your overall model, but also like down to your people as well too? Like what's your perspective on the data problem in cyber?
I mean, I agree with the headline. I think there is a data problem in cyber. So I think it's the right problem to solve. And you look at a lot of the things that we do, whether it's protective or detective or even response, they're only as good as the input data that we've got. So whether that's at the network layer, getting the right threat feeds into our firewalls and our protections, or whether that's into our SOC so that they can really make sure that when they're getting the alerts from the network, that they've got the context to be able to make the right decisions around containment. So it's absolutely critical. I guess my current perspective on it is very strange to me that in itself is not a problem that the market wants to buy. So I think we're starting to see some progress in it, but it feels like it's very much in pockets. So we're seeing some of the bigger platforms really push into sort of data fabrics and data lakes that are security specific. But I think absolutely feeds like you guys are absolutely critical. Seeing that coming into the different operational processes we've got would be what is, I think, foundational. And I think also going back to the AI point, actually without the data, it's super difficult. What are you going to automate if you don't have the right data? And if CISA is not updated, you don't have just time data around the vulnerabilities, you really can't do anything. So I think it's increasingly important. I think it will be really, really important in the future because we'll just have less time to kind of do all the manual processes that we do at the moment. So much of what we do at the moment, honestly, is sort of Power BI dashboards, manual review processes, not at the network layer, but at the sort of higher layer. Super important.
I work on the data side, more collection, right? Like collection aggregation, that sort of stuff. And so I do think it's interesting, especially with a lot of the different initiatives globally. You mentioned geopolitics. It's like, well, now you have many, many different people globally spinning up news sources of data for good reason. But yeah, the aspect of now collecting and aggregating, it used to be, I think 5 years ago, you could probably get like 4 or 5 sources and you'd have like pretty good coverage. Now it's like, oh man, you have to go to like 800 different places to figure out, and then you have to validate the data. And so it's been pretty eye opening. And I think some of the different changes with understanding UK is separate of EU, then you have things like CRA, so if you are doing business in EU, Europe, you have different regulation than if you're doing business in UK.
Yeah.
And I think generally we're going to see that trend continue where, different countries in Asia, South America, even in North America have different regulations and different requirements, but also are sharing information. And I've always been an advocate. It's like, yes, more organizations sharing intel and information is a good thing.
Yes.
But that also becomes overwhelming, from a consumer perspective of how do I wrap my hands around all that and get it where it needs to go. So you used to be, this is kind of funny, but Catalan from Risky Business, I literally have told people, I've heard of people back in the day using his Twitter as a Twitter feed for vulns for what they triage. Like that's, that was maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But like, really interesting from a threat feed perspective of like how even that one angle, how things have evolved so quickly over the last couple of years, really.
I think it's also, we're getting more and more balkanized, aren't we? As people sort of retreat back into their own countries and, trust is dropping. There's the sort of paradox of there's more data than we ever thought there would be. And people are less and less trusting of it. Partly because they don't know what to trust. So yeah, the new world is here.
It is.
On the trust side, it's interesting because I do a lot of the validation, right? And that is a real challenge. Like someone comes out with a new feed and they're like, "Oh, just trust us." That's one of the reasons why I think I enjoy the work I do is we're providing. It's like, don't trust us. Here's all the source information, which is actually a really different approach than traditional intel.
Yeah.
Because historically it's been like, we told you this, so just believe us.
Right.
And so, yeah, I do agree with you. It's, hey, what sources can you trust? Is this real? That is a real important question to ask when you're looking at different data and information.
Yeah. If you look at it too, the data has to lead to something. And like, if you were thinking about, I guess maybe even like the final question for you, Neil, would be like, are you seeing correlation through data sources, through your team, through all the infrastructure that you have? Are you seeing correlation to like specific trends? Like, are you tracking threat actor activity? And do you even focus on specific threat actors where like, that those groups are just like constantly pinging financial services companies? Like, give us your idea, or at least your perspective on like threat actors, and like, does it matter to be able to like understand how threat actors are targeting you in managing your overall attack surface?
So, notwithstanding all the sort of hygiene and the posture and, just making sure that you've got a posture that is hardened to a sort of random attack. I think absolutely. So we have our top 10 threat actors. We have a team that actively monitors what they're doing. Those are the same groups that we monitor, and we talk to, I talked about a couple of the networks that we're members of. So we'll talk to them about what sort of activity they're seeing. And quite often we will get notified through those sort of networks of some of those actors and the activity. Maybe they're targeting one bank. I think cyber is a little difficult sometimes with attribution. Where we get really strong signals is with more on the fraud side of cyber, where we've got some data sharing agreements with some of our banking partners, and they tend to be higher frequency, and so therefore we get a better data feed on them. But yeah, long story short, yeah, we actively track them. I think my experience with the threat intel is that it's just one of your kind of main power tools that you use. It's not the only tool. Like, we definitely index on it. It's super useful. We don't have unlimited resources. We have obviously more resources than non-regulated organizations. And so we do have to prioritize where we focus, what we're investing in, what we're surveilling, etc. So yeah.
That's awesome. Neil, we totally appreciate you coming on, spending some time with us, giving
deal.
our listeners, like an inside baseball look at like what you're doing, what's important to you. Also, probably, I'm assuming what keeps you up at night too. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some sleepless nights on things, but thank you very much for joining us today. And we'll see you soon. We'll be over across the pond for InfoSec Europe. Love to engage with you a little bit more. We've got some cool stuff lined up around that conference. So thank you again. And to our listeners, you know that this is a place where you come to discuss emerging threats that matter with the people who matter. Thank you very much.
Big thanks for the invite. Love the conversation, and thanks for everything.
Thanks, Neil.